Dave, we had a family vacation last week in wonderful Washington, D.C., and I had an absolutely bizarre event happen to me that I've got to tell you about.
Okay.
We were staying in Crystal City, which has kind of a warm history for Carolyn and I. We always stay in Crystal City. And we were there, and I had gotten all the way up to the hotel room, realized I left my wallet in the car, so I turn around to go back to the parking garage. This DoubleTree there only had a 2-floor parking garage. So I said, you guys go on ahead up to the room. I'll go back and pick up my wallet. Not a big deal. Okay. So I go sauntering back to the parking garage. I get my wallet, and I turn around to head back. There's a woman standing there, and she's clearly lost, okay? And she looks at me and she says, do you know what's going on with this parking garage? And I said, well, I will tell you this. They've got P1 and P2, but P1 is actually under P2, which is exactly opposite from the way that I would lay it out. Yeah, like going down, you'd think you'd go P1, and then underneath of that would be P2 because they're underground. But they're opposite.
Oh, they're underground. Oh,
they're opposite. So I said, first of all, I've walked around this parking garage once already looking for my wallet, but I can tell you that if you're looking for it on P1, try P2. She says, because I've been walking all over trying to find my car. I said, nah, I bet you it's on P2. She looks at me and she says, listen, I'm 86 years old. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I've got nothing going on right now. If you want, and if you trust me, jump in the car. My car's right there. I will drive you around the parking garage until we find your car.
This sounds like the beginning of a buddy trip, road trip to Vegas is what it sounds like. Me and Gladys, we're on the road.
Oh, it felt like a 90-minute road trip because it only took us like 15 minutes. But during this time, are you ready for this? During this time, we talked about the following. Number one, her job at the Pentagon, typing letters for an admiral before computers. She said the admiral was very picky about typewriter accuracy. She talked about flying to Alaska to do government outreaches to small villages. She talked about the death of her husband, who was a Marine. She talked about the possibility of alerting the hotel police of their parking lot problems. The hotel police, Dave. She wanted to contact the hotel police.
At a DoubleTree, which is basically a guy named Gary.
Yeah.
The hotel police.
I'm like, yeah, well, maybe if we can't find the hotel police, the cigarette girl can tell us where to find them.
But cigarette girl!
But no, she's going on. We talked about hair care. She prefers mousse. She asked if that mousse stuff is supposed to make your hair grow thicker. I said, my dad puts that cow stuff on the lawn and it grows great. Went right past her. She dodged that joke the way Keanu Reeves in The Matrix dodged bullets.
Wait a minute, was she talking like the guy on the FedEx commercial? How did you get this much conversation in this fast?
It was nonstop, one after another. And meanwhile, I'm driving around desperately trying to find this car because my family's upstairs and they think that I'm lost because, let's face it, I don't have a great sense of direction. There's every chance that I'm just wandering the streets at this point.
This poor woman, by the way, found the worst possible person to help.
Yes, we're trying, because I know I'm missing aisles and stuff. And at some point, I'm just going the same places over and over that we know that the car's not. She talked about malpractice lawsuits. She's talked about, I think we've been through this part of the garage already. And then we go by a guy and she says, is that guy an attendant? I think that guy's a parking attendant. Slow down. I think that guy's a parking attendant. He's just a guy. He's just a guy in a jacket walking in the parking garage.
Just a guy in a jacket.
She's pissed off. So as we're driving by, she's making that gesture with her palms up and she shrugs and she's got her eyes bugged out like, hey, where's my car? And she's shrugging and her palms are upstretched. And meanwhile, I'm embarrassed because she's making this gesture. So I'm trying to gesture to the guy that I don't know what this woman is doing, but I realize I'm making the exact same gesture with my palms up and shrugging with my eyes bugged out. So now there's two people in a car driving past this guy, shrugging with their palms. And meanwhile, he's not a parking garage. He's just a guy. He's just a guy who's trying to live his life.
Also, as a guy, he's going to assume that's your mom in the car. Like, why would he assume that you're a stranger? Like, I don't know who this lady is.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about everything. We talked about everything. Finally, and by the way, I'm skipping through. She also talked to me about her granddaughter. She actually talked to me about she drove to Washington, D.C. with a passenger who would not shut up. And I'm like, really? I know how that feels.
Here's the sad part, Brad. She drove alone.
Yeah, you know what? I think she might have. Finally, we go through, and I'm like, wait a minute. Because Dave Kellett popped into my head. I said, I'm going to roll down the window, take your key fob for your car, hang it out stick it out the window, and start pushing the button that'll make the car alarm go off.
Nice.
We do that within 5 seconds. We start hearing the beeping and the flashing lights. I follow the commotion. We drop her off. She opens the door, thanks me very nicely for helping her, and talks for another 5 minutes.
No, like outside the car at that point?
With the door open, and I'm like, well, thank you very much. And I'm trying to give her, the convention handshake, shoulder push. Nothing's good. She's talking, and my kids are texting me. I can see on my phone popping up, Dad, where are you? Are you okay? Do you need help? I'm like, no, I just got caught doing a good deed for the day.
I legit thought this story was going to end. Oh, you know what? I haven't had a car since 1974, but this has been a lovely chat.
Oh my God.
I just stand here in the garage looking for handsome young men to jump in their car with.
And meanwhile, she's got like this quilt, but there's stuff that's inside the quilt. So I'm like, is she going to pull a gun out? Is this going to be something where I'm going to have to very embarrassingly, tell that this is how I got held up by an 86-year-old woman? But no, it was just more hair care products. And she prefers moose.
Wait, she had a quilt? You're burying the lead. Why was she carrying a quilt?
Because I'll tell you why. Because she had a whole bunch of hair care products, including a whole bunch of shampoo and conditioners that she was stealing from the hotel. Like 9 or 10 of those little itty bitty bottles that you take because they're there. Everything was stuffed into this quilt that she had wrapped around it as a makeshift purse. And she was taking her mousse and her hair care products and a whole bunch of DoubleTree shampoo from the place.
Oh man, Brad. Well, I tell you what, we're on the road to discovery today because we've got half tank of gas and an 86-year-old woman ready to join us on ComicLab. And I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
That was one hell of a transition. And making a living from comics, I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm Gladys, Brad's new friend. I don't actually stay at this hotel. I just want to talk. Have you seen the price of parsnips? They've gone up 16 cents. Oh, my goodness. And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. Just a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our VIP members over from patreon.com/comiclab at the live gab setting. And of course, those shows are archived. So if you missed the morning recording, you can watch it in the archive. And today's show, Bradley J, is brought to you by the good folks over at Wacom at wacom.com, wacom.com, the makers of the new Wacom One, which, as Bradley always says, brings that portable professional results that we have come to expect from every Wacom we've ever owned.
Absolutely. And there's so many times when I just thank goodness I've got that Wacom One sitting there in my house, because every now and again, either I decide, I've got a few hours that are open. I'm going to sit down and maybe work on a page or work on a sketch. Or just sometimes I've got to stay home to help out with things around the house with the kids or with my wife. And if I can't get to the studio, where I also have another Wacom One, if I can't get to the studio, I can sit right down there. It's portable. We've got that back deck now. I'm bound and determined I'm going to take that Wacom One out on the back deck and spend a Sunday afternoon back there working there because I can. That's the delight of having a Wacom One. I can take it anywhere.
I am legit. It's funny you should mention that. I'm legit. The highlight of my summer is we're going for 4 days up to the mountains at the end of August. I am 1,000% bringing my Wacom One because I remember that moment of you, a baby deer, like a family of elk walking by, just drawing on the deck when you were vacationing last summer. Anyway, so Brad, let's jump in. We thank again the folks at Wacom, WACOM.com, and let's jump in with the first question today. And I tell you what, before we have the one from Patreon.com/ComicLab, looks like Gladys had a question. Gladys, did you have a question for Brad?
I did, yes, Bradley. My daughter Suzette is recently divorced, and I have to ask you, you're so handsome with the Van Dyke. Are you available? Are you on the market?
No, I'm afraid I've been spoken for quite some time, Gladys, but I do appreciate the thought.
Let me ask you, Bradley, is it a happy marriage? Suzette is a lovely woman,
Well, listen, if she's anything like her grandmother, I know she's at least well coiffed.
I know she at least has $40 worth of DoubleTree shampoo.
Yes. Well, Dave, we've got a great question to start things off with here, coming in from our Patreon backer, Alexi, who says, let's say you're new to comics and a listener of ComicLab. You've finished several strips of your comic and are ready to start a Patreon, and you've already figured out your initial tiers and you're ready to post things. How do you make your first post? Do you upload your first strip on all your social media as well as Patreon and then point to your Patreon and then start the exclusive early access posts? Is there something else you would suggest? That seems like the only obvious way for me. Thank you both. So Alexi is experiencing those first post jitters. Dave, how do you talk Alexi through that?
Well, like anything, the first step feels like it's going to be the hardest, Alexi. So you're getting a sympathetic ear from Brad and I in the sense that we know that anytime you pull the trigger on anything, it's hard just to get going. I do think, based on I think your second and third sentences there, I'm a little nervous that you're putting the cart way before the horse, and so for that, I would actually like to turn it over to Brad because Brad has an excellent summary about what the term crowdfunding means and how those two words put together should be taken in order. So, Brad, do you want to talk about crowdfunding?
Absolutely. Everything you need to know about crowdfunding is right there in the name. First comes the crowd, then comes the funding. And if you haven't even posted your first comic yet and you've already got your Patreon set up, you need to listen to an episode or two back where somebody wrote in and said, listen, I know you guys always suggest don't do a Patreon right away. Start to build your crowd and then go for the funding. But she said in her case, I did it anyway. And she talks, go back and listen to that episode. She talks about how that really screwed her up. That really like mentally did a number on her because she was she couldn't concentrate on making the comic good. She was so busy trying to make sure that the Patreon was taken care of and she was doing exclusives and all this stuff that really, frankly, comes later after you've been doing this for a little while. And she said it's, and now the question she was asking is, now I'm going to cut back on my Patreon. What do I do with those people, maybe the one or two, or I don't know how many, however many people signed up. What do I do with that? And it's something that we can't caution you strongly enough. If you're just starting out, you should not be thinking about Patreon right now. You should be considering on how to do a good comic.
Absolutely. Yeah, the comic always has to come first. It's the foundational thing upon which every other thing that we talk about on the show is built. The social media, the crowdfunding, the kickstarting, the convention appearances, the business planning, all of that has to be built upon a good comic that you are loving doing and your readers are enjoying. And the readers, frankly, only come when you are enjoying it and you are putting your best foot forward with each installation update, I should say, and applying your best skills and getting better and better with each one. So really, it's like saying, hey, I've got all my clothes on. Now, where do I take a shower? Well, no, you've got the order wrong. So you really want to focus on the comic first. And frankly, it's not something that a lot of people like to hear, but you're going to want to focus on the comic for a good long while. It might be 2 years for some people. It might be 3 to 5 years for some people. It might be 7 years for some people before it really starts to build up enough of an impetus where you can start to apply the other things that we talk about. The merch sales, the Patreon, the convention appearances, right? And the reason I say 2 years as like the starting point is you need time to really get good at getting good and to know that you've got the comic making down so that you can start adding more things to your plate. It's like having a first-time chef saying, all right, now you're responsible for 7 things that are sauteing at once versus like, just focus on the main entree. Just cook the main entree. Let the other ones, the other dishes cook later. Like just get the entree done first. You know, like granted, a master chef will eventually start to balance out 19 things that are cooking at once. It's not the thing you want to do in that first 2 years. Brad, additions to that idea?
Yeah. There's something else that I want to talk about, and that is the nuts and bolts of getting off the ground.
Yes.
Because in the first part of that question, Alexi asks, how do you make your first post? And I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. No matter what platform you're using, there'll be a button there, and it either says send or publish or okay. What you do is you hit that button. And I'm not being facetious. I'm serious as a heart attack. You need to hit the button. I don't care where it is. I don't care what you're doing. You got to hit that button.
Can I pause you for 1 second? You did not use the phrase "I'm serious as a heart attack" when you were talking to Gladys, right? I just want to make sure.
No, absolutely not. I didn't want to tempt fate. God only knows I couldn't find her car in a parking lot of 2 decks. Do you really think I could find a hospital?
Oh God.
But no, I hit the button, Alexi. Hit the button. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to start on social media. Start putting this on social media, whichever social media you're comfortable. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. I don't care. Start posting it. You want to put it on Webtoons? Put it on Webtoons. You want to put it on Tapastic? Put it on Tapastic. I don't care where you put it. I want you to start publishing it. I want you to start putting it out there. Later on, Dave and I are both stalwarts on this. Later on, once you get your speed, once you realize this is something that has legs or something that you can carry on with or something you want to carry on with, then at some point, we're going to tell you, you need a website. You need to set that up, start making that the hub of your activity. But before you can do any of that, Alexi, you got to hit the button.
And I want to say, Alexi, that for everyone, myself included, we all operate from a place of fear sometimes when we start.
Yeah.
But here's something that I think might be helpful to you, which is if your fear is failure, if your fear is that no one is going to latch on or catch on to this or spark with your comic that you're putting out, here's sort of the beautiful thing about life. Life lets us fail in obscurity for a little bit. And that's okay. Yeah. That's actually something to be embraced, not something to be shied away from. Is that when I started out, it had 1, 2, a dozen, 2 dozen readers. If I failed, or if I decided to entirely reboot, or if I decided to go in a totally different direction, having tried this thing and realized that I didn't like it, that's okay too. That is the beauty of failing in obscurity, because you're not yet like it's much harder for a top 20 band to put out a new album and they're experimenting, right? Because they're not failing in obscurity. They are massive stars of which whole entire PR campaigns are being written. And so when that album fails, they are failing in the most public way possible, right? And so if you're feeling fear right now that's keeping you from action, Alexi, know that there's actually something beautiful about a quiet, small audience that you can experiment with at first. You know, that's okay. That should be embraced, not run away from.
Yeah. And remember what we're always telling you, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And to take that marathon, you've got to take the first step, you know. And I know what you're thinking, because I hear this all the time. Well, I want to start right. I don't want to make any mistakes. Listen to Dave and I talk on this show. We've made tons of mistakes. And some of them we'd wish we could go back and avoid, but there's always going to be something. Right? As the late great Gilda Radner used to say on Saturday Night Live, there's always something.
Yeah.
You know, you can't get away from it. There's always so don't let that stop you. And in fact, that should be part of the joyful challenge you're taking on as independent cartoonist. You're going to have your own mistakes that you get to solve, and that's okay too. Yeah, there's no such thing as a flawless start. There's no such thing as a perfect launch. And by the way, nobody in the history of comics has ever recommended a comic because it had a perfect launch.
Right.
None of that matters.
What a great point. What a great point.
None of that matters. And nobody says, "Oh, you got to read this comic." The first 3 weeks were executed perfectly. Yeah. They posted it on just the right accounts. They had just the right hashtag. Nobody cares about that. Yeah. Get to your comic. Come on. Now listen. And by the way, here's what you're denying yourself, because just this past week I did a TikTok live event. While we were live, as I was talking.
By the way, those nipple clamps were fantastic. I think those were great, Brad.
Well,
really
listen,
nice work.
You hit them just right. You get that.
You got them both counter spinning, which is really hard. It took
me so long to figure out how to do that, but it's actually in the shoulder blades. You've got to get that just right.
Shoulders. By the way, because I don't really do TikTok, so my idea of you doing all these sort of weird thirst trap things while you're talking about comics delights me to no end. All right, sorry, Brad. You were doing a TikTok last week. I apologize.
As the TikTok live was going on, another one of our Patreon backers who goes by the moniker The Cheesy Cheska hit her publish button during the live. Like she made her first comic live. She had, I think, 5 updates and she put it on Webtoons. And we sat there and read it as it was becoming available. Absolutely wonderful stuff. That kind of excitement, that kind of joy, that's what you're denying yourself by not hitting the button. Go out there and hit that button. Because I'll tell you what, and I told Cheska this too, the first couple pages, I said, okay, at some point we're going to talk about some lettering issues. We're going to bring that into pace, but none of that matters right now. What matters is you got that page out there, and it's a good page. And now that you've done that, you can do anything. You can't improve on nothing. You got to have something there to work with.
Oh, what a great way to say it. You can't improve on nothing. I know that sounds like it's cliche-ish, but it's 1,000% true. So I want to end with 3 other thoughts before I personally wrap it up. And Brad might have more, but one is that Alexi, life is short. And if there's one thing that COVID has taught all of us, is that you've got to seize these moments, these days that you have, because if you wait for some angelic sign that now is the day to start, now is the perfect time, now all the stars have aligned, you're going to be waiting a long time. Start. Yeah. This is a beautiful thing to be able to put out art into the world. So start, right? So that's number 1. Yeah. Number 2 is the mistakes that you make, you won't even be able to spot as mistakes until 5 or 10 years on, after you've cultivated a better editorial eye and you go, I see what I did. Oh, well, that was a younger me. No big deal. But you'll shrug it off, right? And then the third point, I absolutely forgot. So I'm going to keep talking in a sincere voice, and it's going to come to me because I absolutely blanked on what point number 3 was. Oh, boy. Well, what a fun moment for my brain. What a delight.
Dave, can I drive you around the parking garage until you see your point? Did your point have anything to do with Doubletree shampoo or your husband who was a Marine?
Oh, my God. Boy, Gladys and I have a lot in common today. Oh, boy. No, but I mean, I'll leave it at the 2, though. Life is short. Start. It's a beautiful thing.
It was a good 2.
As I said from the beginning, Alexi, my 2 points that I wanted to get across. Brad, any other capstone thoughts you want to say? But good luck with it. That's my...
Just the one point. Push that button. Come back. Hit the ComicLab Discord server. Let us know where we can see that comic, where we can read it, and cheer you on. Alexi, I want to see you hit that button now.
And listen, Brad, Grandpa just remembered his 3rd point. So
for Christ's sake, I just wrapped this whole topic up.
I know you wrapped it up. Grandpa just remembered. Hold on, Grandpa's getting out of his easy chair. All right, here's the thing. Is that the mistakes that you make, the one thing that you will find in life is that you just wish you had made them sooner. Like, it's not a problem to have made the mistakes in a launch, just to make them quicker. That is literally, I just wish that the mistakes that I had made at 28, I would have made at 24. So jump in, because time is forgiving. And why are you looking at me on this, Brad? I'm sorry that I say, no, I'm being sincere about this. This is a genuine point. The mistakes that I made, I wish I just made them quicker, just cycle through them quicker. You know what I mean? Where I could wipe away the fear of 24-year-old Dave and just jump into things, not knowing that I had all the answers yet, but that I would make them, because as Brad said perfectly, you can't improve on nothing. So get it out there. Brad, let's wrap it up with your earlier wrap up, and let's cut out my entire diatribe there. That was my third point, though.
I totally think that third point was worth waiting for. That was a good third point. Alexi, hit the button.
Hit the button. And good luck. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, are you ready for a little bit of ComicLab recap?
Brad, when is a moment that I'm not ready?
Well, let me tell you, we've got recap is a section of the show where we take up topics that we've talked about before, but there's been some more information on them. And here's a few that I wanted to share with you. For starters, Matt Forbeck, who you can find on Twitter as M. Forbeck, that's M-F-O-R-B-E-C-K. He's a New York Times bestselling author and game designer, and he's done an entire Twitter thread that explains why his game design company is ending shipments to the European Union for any future Kickstarters.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, you can see basically he's actually subtweeting another person by the name of John Nephew. But it's a Twitter thread worth reading because it goes through all the reasons, all the steps. They've tried every different which way to try to make this work. And because of either the cost or the red tape of the administration of all of this, there are other companies and other small independent artists and game designers and so forth who are saying, we're just not going to be able to do it. It's it's impossible to follow the rules as they've stated them.
I have to tell you, the one thing about American compliance with EU and British VAT tax laws is even with the best of intentions, it's proving so hard to do the paperwork and to get it right. You think you have it all right, and you're like, maybe I don't. I thought I was an intelligent person. Clearly, I'm not, having read through these 20 VAT documents. And so I kind of get it. But it's painful. It's painful to lose that. Even if it's, for me, it's only, I don't know, 5% of my audience and maybe less of my buying audience, if you want to look at it that way. But that's painful to lose that percentage. And so I'm intrigued to follow along. I'm going to go check this out after the show because I want to see what this Twitter thread is. Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for that one, Brad.
Yeah, that's one that's worth reading for sure. Also, at the time that this podcast is going out to the public, just wanted to give you a heads up. Your quarterly estimated payments, Q3 payments, are due on the 15th. So have that on your radar so you don't forget it. Also, Dave, I love when convergence like this happens. This is going to amaze you. We were talking about Willie Nelson last time we were recording. Do you remember?
Right.
How he's kind of become almost a self-caricature of his own style. Willie Nelson, it just came up on my Spotify, has a new album coming out. Are you ready for this? It's Willie Nelson, and it's him and Michael McDonald. And do you want to know the name of the third artist that is on here? The name of the album is Dreams of the San Joaquin, Michael McDonald and Willie Nelson featuring David Hidalgo.
Now,
as you remember from Dr. Hidalgo's Peculiar's Black Cherry Soda.
How dare you misremember my thrown out joke there, which Dr. Hidalgo's lugubrious cherry soda. Was that what it was?
Lugubrious, I think it was lugubrious. That's
right. Amazing. David Hidalgo joining the good folk. Wow. What a weird bit of kismet that name would come up on. You know what's funny too is that old kind of cowboyism of calling something the blank. Like Dream. My next album's called. Well, hold on. I gotta do Willie Nelson. My next album's called Dreams of the San Joaquin. He kind of has a Kermit. Like he fades off like Kermit does. Like San Joaquin. You know, like. But it's funny when you don't say San Joaquin Valley or San Joaquin Trail. You just say Dreams of the San Joaquin. That's such a cowboyism of like. Yeah. Well, we're going down to the Panhandle. Whatever it is they're saying. They don't fully describe what it is. So he's got a new album out, and it's just an hour of him picking. Is that what it is?
Well, and the thing that amazed me is that the third artist there is David Hidalgo. It's a name that I've never heard before in my life until you turned it into that runner, and now it's a person that's on this album that's come up and converged with the artist that we were just talking. It absolutely frightened me to see this name.
A name that you thought I just made up.
Pulled this name out of thin air.
Well, you know, I mean, the good folks at Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda Bread have been giving you comfort and delight for years with their cherry Wisniaks. And so now you're going to be enjoying the Hidalgo family's musical talents as well on the new Willie Nelson album. So there you go. And what was the third update, my friend? I think you had a third one
We've
for us.
We've got one last update before we get back into the show, and I had to share this with you. You are going to love this. So I obviously, as you know, I follow an awful lot of independent cartoonists on Twitter and different social media. And there was this one person that was just knocking it out of the park with this series of Shark Week comics. They were comic strips with the idea of Shark Week as a theme. His name is Steve Lewis. He does a comic called Skull Pizza. And I remembered, I think I follow him on a couple of different services. And I was just like, this is amazing. Every one of them was just a home run. And he posted on Twitter one image that had all of his Shark Week comics on it. And just kind of as a little, here they all are. And I remarked, each one of these was a gem. This was an amazing series. This person is obviously not a bad cartoonist, or else I wouldn't have been following him. But these were like a cut above. This was special stuff. And so I wanted him to know. I said, these were really good. I'm going to read his response. I should mention, he says, thanks, Brad. I should mention there's a fair amount of ComicLab influence over these. And he noted he was a $5 patron. From the writing tips to moving back to Clip Studio to writer's rooming with D.H. Vlad, who's another cartoonist that I follow. So in other words, these Shark Week comics were a result of this person doing and forming a writer's room like we do on the exclusive ProTips podcast. They're doing their own writer's room. And I'm telling you, the results was visible. Because like I said, I follow this guy for years. All of a sudden, these Shark Weeks, I'm like, these are great. And he's like, yeah, we've been writer's rooming it with D.H. Vlad.
That's fantastic.
Yes, this is exactly what we wanted.
That's exactly what we wanted. And the idea that even if you're not able to form a writer's room at the moment, we've had more than a few people tell us that listening to those episodes has informed how they go about their own joke writing in terms of like not editing right away, letting more free-form association roll around for the first 10, 15 minutes. So I'm so glad that those writer's rooms episodes are helping. That's fantastic. That's really fun to hear.
Yeah. And if you want to see it, Steve goes by Skull Pizza on Twitter, and I'm telling you, they're an absolute delight. So I've got a great topic to follow our first topic with. We started the show by talking about beginnings, In other words, literally beginning your comic. Now let's talk, Dave, about endings. We've got a question here from a Patreon backer, the Cheesy Cheska. I was just talking about Cheska. Here's her question. Says, "Hey guys, I'm a newer fan and I've already learned so much from the episodes I've heard so far. My question for you two is about endings. I hate when things end and have written everything except the end of my comic. I can't even get to the next books planned for after, but I can't wrap my head around how to end the first story. How do I bring it all together for a satisfying ending while leaving readers ready for the next book?" So Dave Kellett, I ask you, we've talked about beginnings. Now let's talk about how to write a good ending.
Wow, what a great question. And what an interesting way to phrase it, that they've written follow-ups, they've written everything around it, they just can't write the ending itself. That's an interesting, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw something out, Brad, and you tell me if you think this is crazy or not, because I think there's actually some truth to this. Our collective inability to handle endings is, granted, it's from a writer's standpoint, it's also about wanting to stick the landing, and I get that. But I think in part, there's a bigger fear of death in not wanting to approach endings. Because this specific thing is, this artist was saying, I don't want it to end. Not that I'm afraid of sticking the landing. I don't want it to end. And part of it is the trouble that we all have in saying that things will come to an end. I will come to an end. My work will come to an end. And there's a sadness about that, and a melancholy and a fear about that. And especially when we have long-standing projects that have to end or wrap up, there's a little death in that. And it's hard to, you know what I mean? It's kind of a, what was it all for kind of a moment, or did I do a good job? Or, you know, those memes of, was I a good blankety blank, you know, that kind of thing. There's a little bit of that in there, and that you want it to have all been worthwhile, and to think that you made your mark in the world. And I know that sounds a little bit too big of a swing for someone that's just asking about endings, but I think it's true. I think there is a little bit of fear of death in not wanting to deal with endings in our storytelling. Don't you think, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think there is a little bit of our own mortality that is wrapped up in the writing process of an ending. Nevertheless, here's a few thoughts I've got on writing endings that I'd like to share with you. And I'm going to go through and talk about types of endings to kind of give you an idea that there are some different ways that you can go about this. And maybe one of them kind of triggers a thought that fits well in your narrative. The first one is the circular ending. That's when somehow thematically the story kind of comes full circle, and maybe the character ends up in the same place as they began, but obviously there's something different about them because that's what your story was about. But a circular ending. When I talk about this in my storytelling class at University of the Arts, I always play that Pixar short from 2003 called Knick Knack. It's the one with the little snowman in the snow globe. I don't know if you remember that from all that far back. But it's got this wonderful circular ending where basically he escapes the snow globe, and then because of his own perniciousness, he ends up right back in a snow globe.
Perniciousness. Oh, what a great word, perniciousness. I don't hear that one often. Wow, good one. Keep going.
Well, listen, I've got to keep up with you. If you're going to throw around lugubrious, I've got to counter with some perniciousness. But that's a really good one. Readers love it when a story comes full circle. It means that certain themes have been wrapped up. You've addressed them, and everything seems to kind of find a new balance. A full circle ending is really a delightful and satisfying for readers when you bring that character back to where they started. You can have a match.
Before you move on to the second one, Brad, can I just chime in on that one? I think it's really important because every classic tale that we always loved, from, I don't know, Odysseus to Frodo, they return back to where they came, but they are changed by the process. Sometimes it's a humbling change. Sometimes it's an improving change. Usually it's in whatever it is, it's an edifying change of some sort. And I think the change is really important there. It's really satisfying to go back to where you started. There's something circle of life about that, but the change is a key part of it. And so just keep that in mind as you write it. So sorry about that. Keep going to point number two.
And remember that place doesn't have to be geographical. They can come back to an
Yes.
emotional place. They can come back to a mental place. It does.
Yes.
This is not geography.
Sorry, I got very excited about that. Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
So that's the first, and that's very, very popular, full circle ending. Here's another one that I'd like you to consider. It's a matching ending. And it's very similar to a circular ending, but the matching ending ends with a theme or an image that's similar to something that was used in the introduction. In other words, it's not something that the character came full circle, but if you started, I'm going to just throw something out there, that like if you started with an image of a wagon, right? And you end with the image of a wagon, but in a different context.
Right.
That's bringing that idea back from the beginning and gives that audience something to kind of focus on. And it's like, oh yeah, we started the story with a wagon. We're ending the story with a wagon. You see what I'm saying?
In a sense, I think didn't Luke Skywalker start not real, but his own personal journey? He started with the sons, he ended with the sons. Wasn't that thing? And then J.J. Abrams brought it back again. But yeah, that's a great one. The idea of a visual mnemonic that reminds you of where you've been and how different the thing is now at the end. Yeah, that's a great one. Keep going.
Yeah. Here's another one, and it's one that we see carried off an awful lot, but it's got some dangers to it. So be careful. It's the surprise ending. That's where, and I just did this when I was writing the newest chapter to Evil Inc., where I literally got to the end. I got to the penultimate page, and I'm like, oh, I just stopped. And I said, plot twist. What would a plot twist be here? And I did a plot twist ending to this chapter I was writing. Now, plot twist endings are wonderful. Everybody loves a surprise ending. The problem is you've got to make sure that plot twist makes sense. You need to do a rewrite. Now that you've come up with the plot twist, it's always a very good idea to go through and rewrite that chapter with that new plot twist in mind to make sure that everything makes sense along the way.
Right.
For an example of a great plot twist ending, obviously go back to the 1968 movie Planet of the Apes, right? That was when he sees the Statue of Liberty on the beach. That was an amazing plot twist that blew everybody's mind, right? I hope I didn't spoil it for you, Cheska. But a plot twist ending is good. Just be careful. Go back and rewrite that chapter and make sure that it makes sense.
That's a good one. If you're passing it over to me, Brad, I'll jump in with one of my thoughts, which is don't forget, as you're nearing wrapping up, I personally think this is incredibly key. We do not have the benefit of having had a editor working with us throughout the process. So, and most of us have been creating this story over the course of years. So I would really underline how important it is to go back, pour yourself a big cup of coffee, a big pot of tea, whatever it is for you, and reread the work holistically. All right. And this does a couple of things. It reminds you of storylines and threads you may not have yet wrapped up. There's nothing more frustrating as a reader going like, well, wait a minute. What happened to Scoot Dooter from chapter 2? Scoot Dooter never had their whole storyline. We wasted 30 pages on that. What's the thread on that one? Right. So there's that. But then also what's interesting about sitting and in one or two sittings reading through your own work is if you're being open-minded about it, you will see that there were themes sometimes that you didn't even plan. Jokes that came in, runners that came in, affectations that certain characters would have no matter what scene they were in, where you're like, oh, all right, I guess I did have sort of a theme underlying here that I need to include in my closure, right? Sometimes it's a theme, like Brad said, sometimes it's an emotional theme of like love matters, or sometimes it's an emotional theme like friends will betray you, or things that you didn't realize at the time you were writing in there that over the course of 5, 6, 7 years, you're like, oh, it looks like I kept going back to that theme. That's something I should work into the end. And then, sorry, Brad's now fired up. Jump in. Go ahead.
I've got two more endings I want to bounce past you. You can also do the summary ending. And Jane Austen was great for the summary ending. She gets to the end and basically tells you what happens later on to all these characters. If you're not a Jane Austen fan, watch the movie Animal House. There's a lot of movies that do this. You get to the end of the movie, they play the closing credits, and then they show you the characters like 10 years down the road, and you find out that Bluto is now a state senator, and this person is all these unlikely places that you don't expect. You can do a summary ending to kind of say, okay, this is where these characters all end up. And the actual opposite of that is the open ending, right? Where you get to the end and you don't say anything. You just let the reader take it on with their own imagination. You're not going to tell them what happened. It is an ending. We've got to present it as a thing. I'm not a big fan. I think you're letting your readers down. I would be disappointed in that kind of ending myself as a reader, but we do have to say that it is a choice.
Yeah.
Overall, though, what I want to tell you, Cheska, is the same thing I tell my storytelling students. Writing kind of has it's very simple in a way, in that here's what you need to do as a writer. And it's the same thing they told you when they taught you probably how to write an essay in high school, right? What did they always tell you when writing an essay? They said, this is very simple. They said, tell me what you're going to tell me, then tell me, and then tell me what you told me. Right. That's how you write an essay for high school. Tell me what you're going to tell me, and then tell me what you told me. Fiction writing or story writing is very similar in that in the introduction, you're actually saying, you're going to tell me what you're going to tell me. That's the same. That's the introduction. And then you tell them. And then for a fictional story, tell me why you told me. That's what a good conclusion does. You get through all of your storytelling, and now you're saying to the reader, I just told you something. Now here's why I told you that. Right. You make it, you kind of try to tie everything up so that the end result of that storytelling becomes, this is why I told you. All of these pages that came before, this is why it matters. And again, you can do that in a number of ways, and it's your choice. But the basic kernel of that is tell them why you told them.
Amen. Tell them why you told them. And I will add on to this by saying, we always heard in literature class, the first sentence of a novel, the last sentence of a novel are incredibly key, because they paint for you where the journey is going to go and where you were, right? So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, that kind of a thing, right? I will expand that to say the first page of a comic, the last page of a comic are very key in leaving a mood about what this is and what this was, And so sometimes it's really helpful to think about it in terms of like, what is my last page? What are my last visuals? What am I leaving them on? What is the final note that I'm going out on? Because that can be a very key thing for how they summarize in their own mind what they thought of the work, is that last page, those last sentences, right? And the last visuals. So keep that in mind, that the last oomph is actually important in terms of wrapping up for people how they should feel about it. And I would say, Brad, it's worth talking about. It's always funny to me how different cultures have created different endings. In this sense, Americans have now largely become famous for the happy ending. Like we're almost known for the Disneyfication of storytelling. Like, well, and it all worked out, and everybody got married, and that guy got a car, and everything was fine, right? There is that, but granted, there's also the counter Americana story where, like, you have like a country western song where the guy's dog died, his horse ran off, his truck broke down, right? But what's interesting is we're known for the happy ending. Russians are known sort of for the ash and woe ending of like, well, life is terrible, we all froze to death, and why did we live at all in the first place, right? The British have the ending of like of the internalized pain that you quietly suffer through. That it's funny how culturally, I'm just saying, it's interesting how we all have sort of the known ending of what our stories tell us about ourselves. And for I find it interesting that Americans are so often cast as like, oh, well, they have the cheery endings. Americans always have the cheery endings,
Yeah, it's always cheery, optimistic. Everybody lives happily ever after, and that's it.
It says something about the national mood, I think, of like who we try to tell ourselves that we are, which is we try to be optimistic people. But it's interesting about the reason I bring that up is there's a version of that is you as the writer. What is the message you are trying to put out into the world? And so your ending is your sort of final coup de grace on top of the cake that you're serving someone. And so think about the mood that you want to leave someone as in addition to the final wrapping up of the story points and the character arcs and all that sort of stuff. The mood is important, I think, as well.
Absolutely. So, Dave, I know we start. Speaking of doing a circular ending, speaking of wrapping everything up, we started the show by talking about Washington, D.C. What if we were to try to do our own circular ending and end the show by talking about Washington,
I'm
D.C.?
so glad
Can you do it? Can you do this?
I can do it, Brad. I can. And I'll tell you what. So I wanted to talk about, because you always wonderfully talk about cargo culting in art making, which is to do the thing without understanding the reasons behind the thing. And I always laugh about Washington, D.C., which, by the way, I think is a wonderful city. And I like D.C. a lot. And I love the museum going. And I love watching government at work and all that sort of stuff. I think D.C. is a great town. But it is funny to me that we built that entire town as a cargo cult of what the Romans would have, what we thought the Romans would have had, right? Which is a gray, boring, soul-killing stone color, right? The entire city is so gray, DC. Not the entire city, but you know what I mean? The main government buildings are so bone gray, boring. And the Romans would have painted the shit out of their buildings, would have painted the shit out of the buildings. It would have been so colorful. It would have looked like a taqueria, if you know what I mean, in terms of like color choices. The Romans used bright yellows, bright blues, bright reds, all of that faded in time. So we were left with these gray stone Roman buildings, or the remnants of them. And we thought, oh, well, that's the nomenclature of a government building, is to have this gray, boring ass stone thing. And so DC, we cargo culted it and built a whole city that looked like a boring ass stone color.
And not only a whole city, but go across America and check out just about any bank that was made before, let's say, 1970. They did the same thing with bank designs in architecture because they wanted you to have confidence in the banks. So the banks are the same way. Gray, white buildings with columns, no color, no interest at all. But it was supposed to make you feel confident in putting your money in that bank. And that it goes way beyond that. But absolutely, you see it all throughout Washington, D.C. as an example of, this is what firm, solid government is all about.
Exactly. So we, as like, not we, but in the late 18th century, they're like, oh, Rome, Rome, Rome. Meanwhile, actual Rome looked like Rome. You know what I mean? Like, it was like super colorful and ready to go to town and like vivacious and energetic. And we're like, Rome, 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 Rome. They're going, Rome. Anyway, it's just the whole city is my favorite bit of cargo culting. And like, we will mimic the serious cultures that came before, like Rome. Look how boring and serious it was. Let us build our gray buildings. Meanwhile, they were plastering paint on every square inch they could on their buildings. It cracks me up that we got it all wrong, and I love that.
And living in absolute bacchanalia as far as that goes, too.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, you've done a beautiful job of wrapping up this show, bringing it full circle, and that means it's my time to say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal, Brad Geiger, helper of folks in parking garages. And if you're in the DC or Philadelphia area and need some help in a parking garage, you can call Brad, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com, and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the sponsor for this week, the good folks over at Wacom at wacom.com, the makers of the new Wacom One. And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Brad's friend Gladys. Patreon.com/ComicLab. Bradley.
Alexi, hit that button.